Welcome to the Life You Crave. Simple and sustainable weight loss for women who have better things to do than diet. I'm your host, Lia Pinelli. I help ambitious, badass women stop overeating, overworking, and overgiving to lose weight from a place of love. I'll help you simplify weight loss, end your overwhelm, and create the life you crave. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to this podcast. Let's get started. Hello, my femmes. Here at the Life You Crave podcast, we are re-releasing some of our greatest hits, podcasts from our show that have had the most downloads, the most popularity. We wanted to re-release them here so that they would be right at the top of your podcast feed so that you can dive in and enjoy all summer long. And if you haven't already, please head over to Facebook and find me, Lia Pinelli, and join our Life You Crave community there. It is our podcast community where we are expanding on what you are learning on the episode, diving deeper, building community, and having a lot of fun. So come on over to Lia Pinelli over at Facebook and join my Life You Crave community there. Can't wait to see you. Hello, beautiful people. Recently on the podcast, I shared my transformation story, the story of how I went from a chronic yo-yo dieter to someone who has found food freedom. I shared with you that after years, decades actually, of living in the hamster wheel of overeating and dieting, I stumbled upon a tool that started me not only on a totally new kind of weight loss journey, but has led me to a life that is free of dieting, where I live at my natural weight with minimal effort. That tool, by the way, allowed me to drop 7 pounds without even trying, and I teach it for free over at liapinelli.com. And you can go get started on that right now, and I'll be here when you get back. But today's podcast is the first in a multi-part series where I'm going to share with you how I actually achieved food freedom, the tools I used, and what I actually did that has allowed me to lose 30 pounds and keep it off for over 4 years at the time of this recording. Let's start at the beginning, when I learned how to eat only when I was hungry and stop when I was full. It all started when I was listening to a podcast that was talking about the concept of a hunger scale. The background of the idea was this: when we diet, we screw up our natural hunger and satiety levels. So let's just think about it for a minute. When you're on a diet, you're depriving your body of calories in order to lose weight, right? That whole eat less, move more idea. That puts our bodies into what is sometimes referred to as starvation mode, meaning our bodies freak out when there isn't enough food, when there isn't enough caloric energy. Our bodies don't know that, in fact, there is enough food and that we're just consciously choosing not to eat it in an effort to lose some weight, right? Our bodies are freaking out thinking it's a famine. So what naturally occurs in our super sophisticated genius bodies is our metabolism is going to slow down in an effort to keep our fuel stores, meaning our fat, to keep our storage high, right? Because it thinks there's a famine on the horizon. So what happens is our bodies are now going to slow down our metabolisms in order to keep us fat, so to speak. I like to use the analogy of, I imagine a storage house full of firewood. And each day, these deliveries of logs of wood come along, and each day, the storage house receives 2,000 logs of wood for storage. And each day, that storage house is burning 1,500 of those logs for energetic fuel. So if every day it receives 2,000 logs and it's burning 1,500 of those, then mathematically, it's all sound, right? It's all good. At that rate, there will be a surplus for winter. But if all of a sudden the deliveries are reduced to 1,000 logs, management is not going to tolerate burning the wood at a rate of 1,500. Because that would obviously result in a dangerous deficit. So what does management do? Management makes the call to slow down the burning to 1,000 logs of wood or less. Our bodies manage energy in the same way. This is called a set point. And it basically says that our bodies have built-in thermostats that are designed to keep us at a weight that our bodies believe would have a good chance of fending off famine. Because famine is built into our DNA, right? Famine was a regular occurrence in the lifespan of a human up until not too long ago. And in fact, it's only been until recent history, and in particular in our privileged communities, that we no longer have to worry about the threat of famine. But our biology doesn't know that. So this is why it's actually easier to gain weight than to lose it, because our bodies are designed to hold on to weight in preparation of the famine that is sure to come. So this is why then caloric restriction doesn't work in the long term, because like a thermostat, if you set your thermostat to 70 degrees and then you open the window in an effort to cool things down, the thermostat is just going to kick on the heat even higher to preserve the set point. And your body works in the same way. So your metabolism will slow down in order to keep you at the weight that your body believes is going to be the healthiest and more sound for famine. Let me give you an example with your body. If you, say, weigh 180 pounds like I used to, and you want to lose 30 pounds, you might start counting calories, limiting yourself to, say, 1,200 per day. Just like that wood storage house, your body is going to expertly reduce the number of calories that it is willing to burn by slowing down your metabolism to keep you at what it believes is a safe weight. So for me, that might have been keeping me at 180, or maybe the lowest I could get would be 175. So for many of us, this causes a ton of frustration and even anger at our bodies, when really our bodies are just doing what they're supposed to do, working so hard to keep us alive. And I know you're like, I don't care. I still want to lose 30 pounds. Okay, don't worry. I'm going to get to it. But first, it's so important to understand why caloric restriction doesn't work, because your body will slow that metabolism down to keep you plump and pretty. Plus, and this is so important, caloric restriction also encourages binge eating at some point. And when I say binge eating, I'm talking about when we say that we fall off the wagon or we get a case of the F-its, as I like to call it. Whatever you call it what you will. But I've never met anyone who was counting and restricting calories who didn't also binge with frequency, right? Totally sabotaging their weight loss results. And I know because I've done that a million times in my history. Not to mention, because your body already got the signal that you're into starving it, right, by dieting, then when you do have a binge, there's actually evidence that shows that your body will hold on to the storage, the fuel, the fat that you just incurred from that binge. It will hold on to it even more tightly than it would had you not been dieting at all. This is another contributor to this concept of metabolic dysfunction, right? Which is basically when your metabolism is totally dysregulated due to screwing with it all of the time, thanks to dieting. So tack on to that the idea of repeating this pattern for years and years and years like I did. And for some of us from a very young age, and you can see how this would result in higher weights over time and more struggle to lose weight over time than had we never dieted in the past. Because our bodies keep the score, right? Our bodies are going to remember, oh yeah, this lady, there's lots of famines, right? Because she's going on lots of diets. So I better hold on tight to the fat that I have by slowing down the metabolism to the lowest degree possible to keep her alive. So listen, thinking about how we've all screwed up our bodies and we all have metabolic dysfunction is not useful now, because if you're listening to this podcast, you likely have dieted a whole bunch. So don't worry, we can undo this madness together. Here is how. The first thing you must do is you must, and please, if you take nothing else from this podcast today, just hear me on this one. You must quit counting calories if you're doing that. Not only is it a waste of your time and your precious mental real estate, but it doesn't work in the long term. And it's actually making things worse for you, not better, because like I said, your body's going to hold on tighter to those extra energy units, aka calories. In fact, counting anything isn't sustainable, as it is inherently deprivation-based. And when we deprive, we binge, remember? So don't do it. Stop counting calories, carbs, points, all of it. Stop counting, girl. This is usually where people get freaked out. But Lia, if I stop, I will eat myself to death. I'll grow to 500 pounds and I won't be able to leave my house. Right? And yes, I'm exaggerating a bit here, but the fear behind this is real because we really worry that we're going to be out of control with food. So here's what we are going to do. Instead of counting, we're going to practice eating only when we're hungry and stopping when we're not. Now, take a quick mental note here that this is just the first step. It's not the only step in your journey, but trust me and start here. This is exactly where I started, and it is exactly where all of my clients start too. Okay, how do you do it? How do you eat only when you're hungry and stop when you're not? First, you must let yourself get hungry. And I know we're scared of that. As women, we've been socialized to fear hunger and to fear ourselves if we're hungry, right? It's where this whole concept of hangry came from. It's this idea that if I get hungry, I will be out of control and I will eat the entire kitchen and I will have so much pain and regret afterwards. And because of this socialization, many of us don't even know what hunger feels like because we've spent all of our time eating to prevent hunger. So I'm going to help you out a little bit here. Hunger feels like maybe a growl in your tummy or a little movement in your tummy, or maybe you feel a little lightheaded and foggy, right? It's not maybe in your tummy at all. That is hunger. And I promise you that as you practice this, you will become very familiar with your own natural hunger cues. Our bodies are sophisticated. They are designed to tell you when they're hungry and then also designed to tell you when they're not. And we are reinvesting in ourselves in this way by reconnecting with those signals. Now, don't panic if you find that you're not hungry for breakfast. In fact, most of my clients find they are not. They find oftentimes they're not hungry till 11 a.m., right? 12 p.m., who knows, right? Everyone's a little different. But the point is that we've been socialized to ignore our hunger. And so we just eat because it's quote unquote time to eat, right? Like it's breakfast time. I always eat breakfast at 7:30. We're not even asking ourselves if we're hungry. And that's not helpful because that's what causes metabolic dysfunction, right? Is when we're eating when we're not hungry. So we're not releasing ghrelin, which is there to tell us that we're hungry. And therefore we're not releasing leptin, which is there to tell us when we're not hungry anymore. So we're constantly eating when we're not hungry and never really knowing when we're hungry or when we're full. So don't panic if you're not hungry until later in the day. Totally, totally normal. I want you to eat at the first whisper of hunger. Don't wait until you're overly hungry. This sometimes can trigger overeating. As soon as you experience that first whisper of hunger, that first growl in your belly, that first sign of foggy headedness, that's your cue. Go get something to eat. And now, while you're eating, pay really close attention to how the hunger you felt in your belly changes as you go. Now, in the beginning, this does require a good deal of attention because we are learning to reestablish our hunger cues. So we've got to pay attention, right? We've got to pay really close attention. But eventually, you won't have to pay this much attention when you're eating. You want to go slowly and mindfully so that you can physically feel as soon as you get to that first whisper of satiety. This is the point when you're no longer hungry, at that first whisper of satiety. I like to think of this as a scale. Remember that hunger scale that I referred to earlier? This is a scale of -10 to +10, with -10 being the most ravenous you've ever been in your life, absolutely starving, would be willing to chew your arm off if you had to. And a +10 is totally stuffed. Think like really overdoing it, Thanksgiving dinner, having to lie down on the living room floor and unbutton your pants kind of fullness. Not that I'm speaking from experience with that one. I totally am. The idea of the hunger scale is that you want to eat not when you're at a -10 and you're ravenous. And instead, you want to eat at that first whisper of hunger, which is about at a -2 on the hunger scale, right? So if you think of 0 as being neutral, you're neither hungry and you're neither full, which for a lot of us is an unfamiliar feeling, so you might not know it. But a -2 is when you start to first get the first signs of hunger. So you don't want to wait till you're at a -8. You want to go for food right when you're at that -2. You're at the kind of point of comfortable hunger. Then you want to eat to a +2, meaning you're going to stop eating at that first suggestion that you're no longer hungry. And that's why paying attention is so important. You don't want to stop eating when you're already at a +8. That's also why going slowly and mindfully is going to be really important at this point in your journey, because it does take some time for your brain to register fullness. So if you're scarfing it down, like I certainly know I can do, you might find that the signal for satiety shows up later because you went too fast. Now, I also want to call out here that when I tell you to stop at a +2, that might feel alarming because our brains are so used to overeating and feeling full. So we might kind of panic with worry that we're going to get hungry in no time. And for some of us, I know for me, when I first started doing this work, I was a teacher and I didn't have the luxury of just eating whenever I wanted to, right? Like I, was in the middle of teaching class and if my stomach started to growl, right? Like I kind of had to plan for it. So what I want to assure you of is, first and foremost, is that this does get easier over time. You will be able to anticipate your hunger and then eat accordingly. However, for this particular point in your journey, you really want to allow yourself the space to get a little bit hungry and then eat at that -2 point, and then only eat to a +2, knowing that you can eat again as soon as you hit -2. So every single time you get back to a -2, it's time to eat again. Now, that might get solved by eating a handful of walnuts, right? That might be, you're going to find that getting yourself from a -2 to a +2 might require much less food than you think. So here's an example. I will never forget the first time that I did this. I was at work and I had walked on my lunch break to get Vietnamese spring rolls and a bowl of Vietnamese bun, which is a noodle bowl. And Vietnamese spring rolls are my favorite food on the planet. If I was stranded on a desert island for the rest of my life and could only eat one thing, it would be Vietnamese spring rolls. That's how much I love this food. And I remember coming back to my office, and that's when I listened to that podcast, by the way. I was walking to the restaurant and I walked back and I walked into my office and I sat down with my Vietnamese spring rolls and I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. I was at about a -2 at that moment. I had gone to the Vietnamese restaurant because it was my lunch break. It was my only chance to run and grab something. So I wasn't actually hungry yet, although I didn't really know it at the time. And I was planning on just eating everything I got because it was lunchtime, right? But instead I sat down, I thought, okay, I'm going to try this. So I slowly and mindfully, I closed my office door so I wouldn't be disturbed. And it probably took me 5 or 10 minutes to slowly and mindfully eat my Vietnamese spring roll, which I loved. And I was shocked. It came in 4 pieces. And I was at a +2 once I had eaten 2 of the 4 pieces. Now, keep in mind, I could normally wolf down the entire spring roll and get through the entire bun, which, again, if you're not familiar, Vietnamese buns are these bowls that they're full of rice noodles and delicious dressing that's kind of sweet and lettuce and cucumber, and there's sometimes a little egg roll on top, which I'm pretty sure I had, and maybe some shrimp or barbecue pork. I mean, it is a very robust meal. But I would have no problem just, plowing through both of those dishes on my lunch break. But this time I was shocked to find that after just 2 pieces of spring roll, I was already at a +2. And so I thought, oh, this is fascinating. And I got curious. And if you've been listening to me for a while, you know that curiosity is key when it comes to changing your mindset and who you are with food. So I got curious with myself at that moment. I thought, let's just see what happens. So I closed the lid on the container and I just set it aside and I went back to work. And I couldn't believe it. I was definitely hungry within an hour, probably about 2 hours, if I remember correctly. About 2 hours later, I was at a -2 again. And so guess what I did? I just ate another piece of spring roll. And I ended up, I remember, it pretty much took me the rest of the day to eat the spring roll. And I took the bun home with me and I didn't touch it. And I could not believe it that it works that way. So you get the idea here that you might surprise yourself at how little you actually need to get to the +2. You might. So just be open to exploring. So if you start to panic, don't worry, right? Just remember, all it might take is a handful of nuts. So if you are, in fact, in the middle of a meeting and you get to that -2, a handful of nuts might solve the issue for you right there. You might also want to choose to try this on a weekend so that you have some flexibility with your time and you're not necessarily constrained by meetings or other, professional obligations. I want you to know that this is a powerful, powerful tool. I've had clients lose up to 20 pounds just using this one tool. But the trick is you really do have to eat only when you're hungry and stop when you're not. But you also have to give yourself permission to eat as soon as you're hungry for it to work. Or it's not going to work because you're going to overeat, right? If your brain is thinking this is my last chance to eat right now, you're going to overeat because you're going to try to prevent hunger. But if you tell yourself, I can eat as soon as I'm hungry again, that's where the magic happens. Because what you're doing here is you're awakening and reactivating crucial hormones in your body that regulate hunger and satiety. These hormones are called ghrelin and leptin, and they have long gone dormant in those of us who have been dieting for so long. Ghrelin specifically is responsible for signaling that it is time to eat. But because in our modern world, we eat so often when we're not hungry, for example, we eat because it sounds good, or because it's lunchtime, right? Like I was just talking about, or because we had a hard day, or because the cookies in the break room are too hard to resist, right? Because we eat so often just because, and not because we're actually hungry, we don't give our bodies a chance to produce the ghrelin, because ghrelin is only produced if you're legitimately hungry. So we're kind of constantly short-circuiting that hunger hormone, so it stops showing up. It's like, why would I show up? Like I'm constantly being fed, never hungry. Ghrelin doesn't show up. Well, then ghrelin's sister hormone, so to speak, is leptin. And leptin is the hormone that is released to signal that it is time to stop eating. But here's the deal. If ghrelin was never released, then leptin is going to be out of whack, right? Like these two hormones work together. And if your body isn't releasing ghrelin, well, the leptin isn't going to get signaled in that same way. And so again, your body becomes dysregulated and all kind of out of whack. So of course, the way that I'm explaining this is a very simplified version of the science. But the truth is it's all you really need to understand in order to make changes and get the results that you want. So here's what I want to challenge you to do. Try this for a few weeks. And by the way, I do this whole training in depth in under 17 minutes on my website, liapinelli.com. Just click on the black bar at the top that says, do my free 17-minute training. It takes you through the whole thing step by step. But the point is the same. Eat only when you're hungry and stop when you're not. Tune in next week for part 2, where I'm going to be talking about how I made further changes that impacted my hormonal response to food. So it's beyond leptin and ghrelin that resulted in even more weight loss. This is when things really started to get moving. So today on our episode together, we learned why dieting causes metabolic dysfunction, because it screws with our hunger and satiety hormones, resulting in chronic overeating and yo-yo dieting and increased weight. We also discussed how you can do this. You can recalibrate those hunger and satiety hormones by eating only when you're hungry and stopping when you're not. And you can use the hunger scale to help you do that, which you can, again, go get over at liapinelli.com and my 17-minute training. It also comes with a whole workbook to take you through the whole thing. And remember, I'm here to help. I would love to hop on a call and chat with you so that you too can start losing weight without dieting. You've been listening to The Life You Crave. I lost 30 pounds years ago without dieting, willpower, or deprivation. I'm on a mission to help other women, including you, do the same. You can book a free weight loss strategy session with me over at liapinelli.com. That's liapinelli.com. See you on our next call or on the next episode. And remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment on iTunes.